Yes, hello everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying some sunshine wherever you are joining from today, although Sophie told me that there is not much sunshine where she is. Welcome to this eLN webinar with Make Real, who's one of eLN's industry partners. My name is Asa Daria and I'm one of the eLN directors and your host for today. With classroom training off the table for the near and perhaps a bit the distant future as well, in this webinar we will look at how you can use serious games to create memorable learning experiences that bring people together. Today I'm joined with Sophie Costin, who's the head of learning design, and Matt Garland, who's a senior designer from Make Real. They will take us through the webinar today and we'll take some questions should the time allow at the end. Sophie, Matt, over to you.
Okay. So, hello. Thank you for that introduction. So I'm Sophie Costin, Head of Learning Design at Make Real, and joined today also by Matt.
Hello.
He's a senior designer at Make Real. Hopefully our screen is sharing properly and you can see us with our pre-lockdown haircuts. We don't look like that anymore, but there you go. So for those of you who don't know, we are Make Real. We're an immersive learning technology company. So that means we create bespoke learning packages in VR, AR, but also things for desktop and for mobile and tablets too. And Matt's going to talk us through an example of that in just a minute. Because today we're going to be focusing in on how to create digital learning interventions that build connections amongst your learners, as well as helping learners make connections to the content. So we'll look at some recent case studies and experiences and serious games that we've created. But first I just want to spend a little bit of time thinking about why is it so important to make a connection with your learning content. So one thing I've been a really big advocate of is using, or how we can use technology to create the right emotional state for learning. I did various talks and blogs about that last year, so I won't go on about it too much. But suffice to say that the right emotional state is really good for motivation. It's critical for motivation. And that's important because that in turn makes us more receptive to the content. So it has this knock-on effect where we become more able to retain and recall the information we're receiving. People often talk about making learning more sticky. I don't know, probably some of you have received briefs over the years where there's a call for some sticky learning. I've certainly received a few over the years. Maybe you've written a brief like that yourself. But I think it's just as important to focus in on making the learners more sticky. So creating experiences that motivate them, that make them open and receptive to receiving new information. Even the best content in the world isn't going to have the impact you want if your learners aren't receptive to it. So there's both things that you need to focus on. It's sticky content and it's sticky learners as well. Creating a social connection is a really powerful way to make learners feel more motivated, feel more receptive. And it's one I wanted to call out because it's become just so important, especially at the moment. So our brains release dopamine when we have positive interaction with another person. And that makes us crave human interaction. A really great recent example of that is the Clap for Carers phenomena that's been going on across the country, across Europe, across the world even, I think. Some of you might have taken part in it last night. Obviously, it's primarily to show appreciation for the workers, for key workers, but I think there's also something else going on here where we really derive a lot of comfort from shared experiences. And that feeling of closeness and of solidarity with others is just so important to us, especially at a time like this where we can feel a little bit removed, maybe a little bit dislocated. And equally, studies have shown that we feel loneliness, quite literally, like we feel pain. So in one experiment using lab mice were deprived of social interaction in a cage that had a specific light shone in that cage. And after that period of isolation, when mice saw that light again, they'd go to great lengths to try and avoid it, almost like they would a physical threat or any kind of discomfort, which suggests that social interaction isn't just something we like, but it's something we actually need. So with that in mind, I was just going to put up a quick poll, or I was going to ask actually to put up a quick poll, if that's all right. I'd be interested to know who here has been taking in Zoom or, you know, other web conferencing app supply meetups over the last sort of, well, since lockdown began, so after the last couple of months. Oh, a few nevers there. I've got really addicted to it. The first time I did it, I thought it was weird. I set a mock agenda just to make a kind of joke out of it because it just felt like turning up for a work call. It felt really strange. But now I'm well into the swing of it. I'm definitely in the regularly category. So I think that's all the results we're getting in. So there is one person who's never done it. That's quite interesting. I'm quite surprised. But most people are doing it at least a few times, and regularly is how most people are doing it, which means we're pretty representative of the rest of the UK and the rest of the world, actually. One other question, I don't know how easy it is for people to enter into the chat box, how easy we can see that. But I do have a fact about how many participants there were on an average day by the end of March, dialing into a Zoom call. I don't know if I can see the chat, actually. So I don't know if anyone is guessing. Hang on there. So is there any takers? Does anyone want to put in the chat box how many people they think might have been dialing in, how many participants were dialing into Zoom with an average day by the end of March? 80, that's very low. 100 million. Got 10,000 there. It's higher than that, it's higher than 10,000. Any other takers? Leave it there. Jeff is from Bakerill, and I think he's cheating. I tested this on him the other day, and Jeff has indeed got it. So it's 200 million participants were dialing into Zoom calls across the world, across the whole world, but you've got to think that's the digital world, every day by the end of March. And that's ballooned. So it was the maximum, the previous maximum was 10 million. That's a really big increase. And it just goes to show this kind of social interaction that we're all trying to find. And we're all trying to kind of fudge and mend and make do at the moment, because all our usual interactions have kind of been swept away. Just trying to find sort of digital ways of bridging those gaps, which has had some quite interesting consequences. But even before lockdown began, trying to get back to my slides. There we go. Even before lockdown began, this is a bit of research that was done by Gadget Cover last year, and this is charting what we used our phones for most commonly. And over half of these are social interactions. So, you know, this is how we use our technology primarily, is for communicating and connecting with others. And yet, when it comes to creating digital learning content, historically, it's all been a little bit lonely somehow. And sometimes that's fine. Sometimes you just need to log on and reference something, and that can be a self-directed experience. But too many experiences like this are going to leave us feeling as lonely as a science mouse, which isn't just a great image, so great I felt the need to use it twice. It'll leave us feeling demotivated, and that makes it almost impossible to learn. So what can be done? Well, I think a really good case in point are MOOCs. For those of you who don't know, MOOCs are massive online open courses. So they were sort of set to take the education industry by storm and kind of be very disruptive in that space. So universities can publish their content. So it's, you know, university grade content from the world's best academics sharing their classes in a structured course online. And the only barrier to entry is you need a laptop, you need a mobile phone, something that connects to the internet. There's no cost, there's no entrance exam, nothing like that. So there's very little barrier to entry there. And yet, despite that, a recent study by MIT, so that's Massachusetts Institute of Technology, looked at completion rates for MOOCs across the last 5 years, and found that dropout rate is 96%. So that's just 4% of people who start a MOOC actually then go on to finish it. And I think that's because when we're left to our own devices, it can be very hard to stay motivated. But there are a couple of institutions who are bucking that trend. So firstly, FutureLearn, who are part of the, associated with the Open University, they've really been concentrating on social interactions. So they've been arranging their learners into smaller cohorts and encouraging them to share what they've learned amongst a small community, and then share that then on their social media platform. So there's a real kind of knowledge sharing culture. And in doing that, they're currently reporting a 20% completion rate. So that's, you know, greatly improved on the 4% industry average. Also in Spain, there's a business school, the IE Business School, who are concentrating more on interactivity. So instead of just teaching the theory of business, they've been looking at business simulations and how they can get people to actually practice and play with the content in a much more sort of hands-on practical way. And in doing that, they've seen their completion rates go up to anywhere between 12 to 15%. So a real massive increase there. And this really illustrates the importance of not just making learners receptive, but also making the content enjoyable. So again, it's those two sides of the coin. It's the sticky learning and the sticky learners. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Matt to talk us through a recent example of a game we've been creating for Vodafone.
Hello again.
Right. Do I need to stop sharing?
Okay, that should be all there. Right. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Drive Safe, which is an application that we made for Vodafone, based around driving safety. There we are. So the challenge that Vodafone set out was that they want to reduce the number of driving safety incidents, injuries, and fatalities amongst their own employees and companies that drive for them. But this is a very broad audience. They have thousands of employees and external contractors across more than 30 countries with varying languages and levels of literacy. So we've created an educational game to promote driving safety awareness that runs on iOS and Android. That's free to download on app stores and can run well on low-end devices. So we've got something that's very low barrier to entry, while still enabling kind of rich content such as games with audio and 3D graphics and such. So the kind of high-level overview, the high-level kind of pitch for the game is we have a strong thematic concept of a driver navigating around the map, picking up jobs. We have a mixture of short mini games and multiple choice questions to make gameplay interesting and give a variety of pace and a variety of content to keep people engaged. Fun and rewarding gameplay, just to make things have a degree of satisfaction just in playing the games themselves, through sort of visuals and the gameplay and sound and that sort of thing. A sense of accomplishment and progression, and linked to a sense of pride and a connection with other players. So this is kind of important for the nature of this broad audience, because it's a sort of informal type of learning where these aren't all people that work for Vodafone directly, but it's very much part of Vodafone's mission to increase driving safety across anyone that drives for them. So it's important that people have their own kind of motivation to keep coming back, and it's important to kind of foster this sense of pride to make people take their own safety more seriously. And you know, having an awareness of your peers and a kind of sense of competition is a great way of fostering that kind of motivation. So next, I'm going to show a short video, which just gives a really quick overview of what the game looks like. And then I can talk through some of the elements in a little bit more detail. Caveat, this is a little bit of an old video, so it's not the most polished, but it gives a good sense of what the game looks like to play. So you can see the user moving around the map, answering multiple choice trivia questions that give you feedback. And then some parts of the map will bring you into these little mini games. And we have a variety of these games that all last 2 to 3 minutes. and they cover a variety of different learning objectives, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the idea is to keep things interesting by changing up the pace and getting as much feedback and information that's relevant as people play these different games. And as the player plays, they can kind of get this overall kind of sense of progression, ranking up and getting achievements and that sort of thing. So Vodafone had a set of learning objectives that they wanted to cover across a variety of things. These cover things like journey management and preparation, so vehicle inspections, journey planning, people not getting fatigued, which is a common issue, distracted driving, so things like mobile phones or eating and drinking in the car that can cause people to drop their guards, expecting the unexpected, so being prepared for things like weather or environmental hazards, breakdown procedures, and behavior of other drivers. And also driver behaviors, such as adhering to speed limits and well-being, safe braking distances, and absolute rules. The absolute rules is a kind of core set of guidelines that Vodafone distribute to try and give these really kind of punchy key messages, such as don't drink and drive, obey speed limits, always wear a seatbelt, etc. And we kind of group those things into a set of attributes, which are displayed on this license that you see here. And that's to give this kind of nice, personalized visual indicator of your progression as you play the game. That's something that can help create this sense of pride, kind of tie it back to yourself with the personalization aspect, and give you something that you can compare how you match up with your colleagues or other players of the game. So as I touched on before, you have the metagame, which is the kind of first screen that you see, and that's a kind of sort of a puzzle of navigating around the map, earning points by answering multiple choice questions and playing mini games. The different types of icons on the map represent different types of content. So that gives you a bit of variety of pace and also allows you some choice over what you do. It's designed to chunk up gameplay into roughly 10-minute sessions. So you can kind of play one day in the game. That might take you about 10 minutes with this variety of content. And that's to make it easy and bite-sized to fit around people's lives. Work safe, home safe is a sort of mantra that Vodafone have to try and help foster this end-to-end thinking about safety that starts at home and covers the entire workday and getting back to home safely at the end of the day, rather than just thinking about your safety in the moment. And we've kind of built that into a game mechanic where each time you move on the map, that costs a unit of time. And if you don't get back to the home node before your time runs out, then you'll lose points. So you need to get home safe before the time runs out. And we also have expect the unexpected kind of built in as a game mechanic where things like traffic jams can pop up and cause delays as you move around. So you need to factor in a bit of extra time for things that you could crop up unexpectedly. So a lot of the learning content is in multiple choice questions. So we have over 150 of those covering a different range of topics, and that's some of those were provided by Vodafone and some of those that we helped them design by writing them, all to cover their various learning outcomes. And we've then sorted those into the different attributes that we defined, which are knowledge, preparedness, awareness, and well-being. So that groups them into 4 kind of easy to track and follow attributes that you're always improving as you perform well in the different games. And for each question, you get additional feedback at the end. So in creating the different games, we work closely with a lot of Vodafone subject matter experts in different territories. And in the set of games that we created, we wanted to have a variety of gameplay. Again, to kind of make each one feel distinct, keep the game fresh as you play it, and of course to address the various different learning outcomes. So the one that you can see pictured here is like a vehicle inspection checklist. So they actually have a checklist which they send out to their drivers. And the idea of this game is to kind of rehearse that and be able to identify issues with the vehicle and turn that into something that's more of an automatic process that people won't be complacent and forget to skip. But one of the key things that came out of our discussions with the subject matter experts were lots of relevant local details, things that will match up with people's experience in the different territories, and will kind of resonate with people on a personal level. It will be kind of culturally relevant, depending on where they come from. So there are currently 7 mini games altogether. So I'll just very quickly describe these. So the first one is just a very quick picking from a set of items and choosing which ones belong in your first aid kit or your breakdown kit, or should just be packed in your vehicle or left at home, such as booze or drugs and that kind of thing. We have a sort of choose your own adventure type experience of how to resolve a breakdown situation. And that takes into account a lot of bits of local relevant knowledge, like how different countries use the hard shoulder and whether that's a safe place to stop. We have a game that's about correct protocol for lane changing and keeping a safe distance between other vehicles on the road. Something that's akin to a hazard perception test, where you have to judge hazards in the road, whether you should slow down or stop immediately. Backseat Driver, where you watch a driver driving down the road from the back seat, and you have to flag if they're doing something unsafe, such as smoking or answering their phone. And then we have a game that incorporates video footage with distractions like phone calls coming in, and you get answered questions at the end of the experience, and you see how your observation skills fared with distractions going on around you. And at the end of each of the games, you get this kind of score breakdown and feedback that's based on your performance in the game. So if there were certain things that you did wrong, such as colliding with another vehicle or using your indicators incorrectly, then we use that as an opportunity to kind of tie that down with some specific learning content. But a big element of this is also just to make the end of the game feel rewarding and to kind of help you get this momentum of continually progressing. So the game has a few systems, as I mentioned, to keep this feeling of progression. So you have your voter score, which you earn. So that's this number that you can see below the person's name on their license, and that keeps on building up. Mini games have different difficulty levels, so they change as you play them more, and the content in them updates, and so you'll see different things as you progress. And when your attribute bars fill up, you can rank up. So the game is kind of split into a number of ranks, and that can really become a kind of symbol of prestige, if you like, to kind of show that you're performing well and progressing well. We have a global leaderboard, so you can see where you stack up against all the other players. And Vodafone plan to run competitions with incentives. So we feel that the personalization aspects and giving you this nice kind of visual representation of your progress is something that people can really feel a bit more emotionally attached to and have a sense of ownership over. And that combined with competitions that are set up is going to help really create that connection between users and that motivation for people to keep progressing and, you know, kind of having bragging rights and starting to see that safety is something that they can feel proud about if they're progressing well. So we recently did a soft launch of DriveSafe. So that was released internally to Vodafone employees in the UK, Turkey, Portugal, and South Africa. We had over 100 players in the soft launch, playing across many different countries, and hundreds of hours of gameplay played in total. And to put that into perspective, when the game is designed to be played in sort of 5 to 10 minute sessions. That's a pretty significant chunk of gameplay time, which is really good for us to get feedback from people on how they were enjoying using it and if it was helpful. So we kind of looked at the stats from the players and how they did, and over 50 of the players reached a 20,000 or more voter score, which is a really good indicator of a significant level of engagement. So we know that those players really did get into the game and play a significant amount of time, playing over multiple days and getting to quite a high rank. So this was really excellent kind of indicator for us that people were engaging with it. Vodafone themselves were really happy with how the soft launch went and kind of signed up for a second phase, which includes you know, new content to go in, such as new mini games and new features. And we also sent out feedback forms to all of the departments that did the soft launch, and we got loads of really positive but also really valuable feedback from people talking about things that they learned from the different areas of the game, and you know, ultimately saying how much they enjoyed playing it, which was really rewarding. So the next steps for Drive Safe for the global launch. So that's going to be going out to Vodafone departments all across the world. So that's in 30 plus countries. And as I've mentioned before, that's going to be not just Vodafone themselves, but also any contractors or companies that provide driving services for them. So that's going to be, you know, targeting tens of thousands of users with additional games and features, including more focus on well-being. So in fact, we're working on a concept at the moment for a breathing exercise to kind of help people learn how to be calm and cope with the stress and other elements like that. And Vodafone plans to run internal competitions to set targets and pit users against one another to kind of put a focus on it and help people turn this into a shared experience. And then, you know, for future versions, we also have plans for additional social and competition features and things like having rewards, such as getting a physical version of your license once you've achieved a certain rank, so that people can have something that they take out of the game to show off and get those bragging rights with their friends and colleagues. And of course, we hope that it results in better attitudes to driving safety, less complacency, and fewer incidents. And that's the end of my coverage of Drive Safe. So I'll pass it back to you, Sophie.
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute. Thanks, Matt. I will start sharing my screen again. And hopefully you can all see that again.
Yep.
Cool, thank you. So that was an example of how we've used interactivity to sort of increase some of that learner engagement. But finally, I want to talk through one more example, share an example with you of an experience we've created that's more about sort of social interaction and how you can use social interaction to build learner engagement. And it also has a few other sticky features, other content features that make it a bit more sticky too. So we've been working with Severn Trent Water for several years now, but in terms of this project, since the beginning of the year, they came to us to talk to us about a piece on chemical deliveries. So chemical deliveries are a really everyday occurrence for Severn Trent. It's what they need to do to treat the water to make it safe and drinkable for us. But despite the fact that they're an everyday occurrence, they're a serious business. Like if something goes wrong with a chemical delivery, it can have massive safety implications for the people on the site, for the natural environment, surrounding environment, and also for the general public as well, like us as consumers drinking this water. If it goes wrong, the results could literally be fatal. So they've drawn up a checklist, kind of like a pilot's pre-flight checklist that has all the sort of controls and measures that they need to take to make sure that everything is done properly. But as with a lot of processes, people's knowledge of what to do is very strong, but complacency is creeping in. in the way. So Severn Trent were looking for a solution that encouraged people to use this checklist every single time, something that really got under their skin and made them think twice about what they were doing. So with that brief in mind, we designed an experience that was a team game for up to 5 people, using 1 VR headset and 1 tablet per team. They're being used in tandem. I'll explain that in a bit. And what these teams needed to do was complete an investigation of a fictional chemical delivery that had gone a bit wrong. So just looking at a sort of quick walkthrough of this. So the experience starts with a breaking news broadcast. The idea is you get people in a room, you hit play, and they'll see this on their tablet computers. And it's a news item telling them that they're getting some strange reports in this morning. Customers have been complaining of cloudy drinking water. Within a few hours of that, there's been reports of sickness. Meanwhile, an ambulance has been called to a water treatment site in the area, and they believe there's an accident involving a chemical delivery driver. So the teams are told that a team is being dispatched now to investigate what's happened. They've got their best investigators on it. And of course, the people in the room are that team. So straight away, we're using immersive storytelling to hook people, to draw people in, and to help them make that emotional connection with the content, to pull them together as a team and get them working towards a common goal. For the rest of the experience, the teams then need to work together to find out the answer to these 3 questions. So how was the driver injured? Could the reports of cloudy water and sickness be related to this event? And then in the second round, they're given another objective where they find out that some fish have been dying in the River Trent, and they need to work out how that could have happened as well. That worked. No, where's my... Oh, sorry. I thought I had a sticky donut on that one. I don't have a sticky donut on that one. The experience is all about collaboration as opposed to competition, as we saw with Vodafone. So it's about getting people to work together. We encourage them at this point to assign different roles and to take responsibility for their own part of the investigation. So everyone has a sort of critical part to play. This one. Players then take it in turns to go into the VR headset and look for clues. So there's 3 different environments that you can see here, spread across 5 different rounds. And in these environments, there's these little hotspots. There's lots of different hotspots that you can click on and find out more information and find out clues. So to help structure this investigation, the tablet players are really important. They have a digital version of the chemical delivery checklist that they need to complete to find out what steps were missed and ultimately what went wrong with this chemical delivery. So there's supposed to be a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of back and forth between the team. So the tablet players shouting out instructions to the VR player describing what they can see and the information they're finding, and they sort of collaborate in that way to pull together this report. And this kind of collaboration felt really important for this solution. So one of the reasons that operatives were reporting in real life why they were missing steps, why they weren't using the checklist in its complete state, was that they often felt rushed, they felt time poor, but also they felt like they were holding up their colleagues by using it. They didn't feel it was something that they'd all bought into. So kind of pulling everyone together so that we have this sort of shared sense of importance for using the checklist, this sort of shared understanding of why it's important, was a sort of critical part of this solution. There you go. I keep missing my donuts. There you go. But yes, collaboration helped bring the team together. So at the end of each round, the teams would then come back together. The VR player would take off their headset and they'd be told to sort of regroup around the tablet computer. And we tell them that they'd unlock some CCTV footage that had been recovered from the delivery, from the actual delivery. And we filmed this on site using Severn Trent staff, and we gave it this beautiful CCTV sort of visual treatment, so it felt very real. And these clips would reveal yet more clues as to what went wrong. The language of unlocking these CCTV clips proved really effective. So we found that people paid a lot more attention when they felt like the content was a reward for what they'd done, as opposed to just part of the natural progress of the game. And this round structure repeated 5 times until finally they'd investigated all the locations, they'd found all the bits of information they needed, and then it was over to them to pull together a report and answer the questions in the way that made sense to them and report that back to the groups. So that was just a quick overview of the solution. Just to sort of bring together those key points. So we look to build connections with this learning experience in a number of ways. The key things we did to try and encourage people to make an emotional connection with the content was that we adopted immersive storytelling techniques. So we used rich media, such as audio for the breaking news. We used video for the CCTV footage. And also the VR environments themselves, they feel very real. There's lots to explore and discover, a lot of different avenues for people to take. We also kept people's concentration through gamification techniques, such as point scoring, but also unlocking content, as I mentioned before. And we also kept the experience really directed and goal-based so that people were clear on what they were working towards. So we created social connections by designing this game to be a team game, so people needed to work together. And the main benefit we found from that was the kind of richness of discussion that you get when multiple people are trying to work together to solve a problem. It was really interesting to see the sessions play out. No two were the same. People were sort of putting clues together in different ways, drawing different conclusions. As a result, it created a very sort of high energy learning experience where people were feeding off each other's inputs and sometimes pushing back and sometimes building on it. And again, no two sessions were ever the same as a result, so it's quite exciting to watch. There's also a number of social learning benefits in sort of structuring an experience in this way. So new starters could gain insights from more experienced colleagues, less experienced colleagues, but often asking questions. More experienced colleagues just don't think of, you get used to doing something in a certain way without questioning it. So it has potential to become quite a rich sort of knowledge share in that way as well. So finally, I just wanted to talk about how we had to adapt this concept to work in the current remote working context. Because that wasn't how it was originally designed, but with a bit of adapting, it ended up working really well like this. So our best laid plan was that it was going to be a team game played in the classroom session. The facilitator would be there to assist and answer questions, but there was supposed to be very low level of input from the facilitator. It was sort of a team-led game, self-directed in that way. There was to be one VR headset and one tablet per team, and the teams were going to share those to solve this investigation, to look for clues, as I described. But the reality ended up being a little bit different. A lot of things have of late. So the actual deployment has been put on hold for the time being, but that's meant we can go through quite an intensive period of user testing. But even to do that, obviously, everybody had to be remote, which meant we needed to make a few sort of changes to the format along the way. So we met on Zoom, like everyone's meeting on Zoom these days. And at first we tried to keep the team sizes to how they were intended to be, so sort of 5 to 6 people. But we quite quickly reduced that down. People just weren't sure quite when to participate. You know, I think we've all been on Zoom calls recently where you're not sure if it's your turn to talk, and without being in a room and being able to read people's body cues, it sort of became a bit less directional. So we scaled that down to around about 3 people. That could, of course, also be because we were just learning how to facilitate it. So perhaps as the facilitator becomes more skilled, that can maybe be pushed up a little bit. But I think keeping those teams small is definitely seemed to be advantageous. We also found that it needed to be more directly facilitated, so kind of similar to the previous point, without people being able to work together. People weren't sure when to talk first, even though everyone had their own different roles. People were finding it harder just to sort of take ownership of that. So it seemed to work better to have it more directly facilitator-led. And there was also a challenge around not everyone having a VR headset. A number of the reviewers did have them, but not all. So then only people who had the headset could then investigate the environment. So it wasn't quite as shared an experience as maybe we envisaged. But there's a number of ways around that. If we did need to, if the situation continues, or maybe we just sort of relook at how it is deployed, it would be easy enough to make those environments accessible on a tablet instead, so that just one person's seeing them and no one else is, or on a desktop. We can very easily do that. It's also quite simple to sterilise headsets as well. So another avenue that could be explored is sort of lending library, where the headsets are kept centrally sterilised and then sent out to the participants before the experience takes place. There's lots of ways we can get around that. But with these few adaptations, we still sort of found that it was working really well. It, you know, was entirely not working as we intended, or not in the conditions we intended. But with a few adaptations, it still seemed to be quite an impactful learning experience. We're a little bit sort of scant on impact figures because we have had to sort of put the deployment on hold. But from the small review group we did have, it gives us this kind of tantalising glimpse of the effects that this might have, that we hope it will have. So we took a group from one of the review sessions that we did, and this was a group of people who had no subject matter expertise. So these weren't the people doing this every day. This was a group taken from HR, L&D, finance, that kind of background. So really removed from this kind of work. And we facilitated a session with them and then sent them out a survey. And on the back of that, 75% of that review group strongly agreed they were more likely to use a chemical delivery checklist as a result of the experience. It gained a score of 9.4 out of 10 when the reviewers were asked whether they strongly agreed they were more likely to be careful with the result of chemical deliveries as a result of this experience. And the last one was really my favourite one. Everybody was able to write quite a detailed response as to the importance of the chemical delivery checklist. And as I say, these people didn't come from any kind of subject matter expertise, they don't even work in the field. But every single person was able to respond to a question on why is a chemical delivery checklist important, and give quite detailed answers to that as well. So it was a small group, but it's yeah, promising stats, and we're really looking forward to being able to roll it out more broadly and build on that. So I just wanted to end on a few top tips for how to build connections with your digital content. Oh, someone's raised their hand. Didn't even know that was a thing. I don't know what that means. Maybe I can go on to the chat. What is hand raising? Oh, by accident. Oh no, look, I've just made a really big thing about it. Now everyone's looking. I'm sorry. Let's pretend it never happened. I still don't know what it means. Okay, cool. So, erroneous hand raise then. So I was going to end with a few top tips of how to build connections with digital content. A lot of these are kind of learning design 101 really, but I just wanted to include some of them because they've had a renewed importance recently. So number one, I really advocate finding opportunities for social interactions in all your learning content, and I recommend that at any time, but certainly at the moment. So, you know, it could be a learning experience like with chemical deliveries. It could be a game with a leaderboard, like we saw with Vodafone. Or it could be as simple as just a bit of self-directed learning, you know, a bit of e-learning, and then coming together to have some kind of discussion about it in a small group afterwards. I think a lot of people are kind of looking for that extra dopamine hit at the moment. So it's a really simple thing, but I think it could have some quite significant gains in terms of your learning outcomes, knowledge recall, knowledge retention, and that kind of thing. Next point is that social interactions come in lots of different shapes and sizes. You can unite people with collaboration as much as you can through a bit of healthy competition. So you can sort of structure your sessions in a number of ways. How you're going to want to do that is going to depend hugely on the learning outcomes that you're looking for, the appropriateness to the content, also the appropriateness to the audience. Some people are very motivated by competition, other people would respond much better to having a session where they could work together, or maybe even, as I say, just sort of knowledge share and sort of co-collaborate in that kind of way. Keep sessions goal-based and directed. Again, I mean, that really is learning design 101. Always avoid passive experiences. But what we found when we were running the user sessions for chemical deliveries was that in sort of virtual learning environments, there's more places for people to hide if they don't want to participate, but there's also more ways for people to get a bit lost or get distracted. So we just found it quite beneficial to put even more structure around an event than we usually would. Maybe something to think about there as well. As I say, we found that smaller groups worked much better. I've been finding that for social Zooms as well. I don't know if you have. I tried one with like 20 people at one point, and it was really awkward, and that seems to translate into a learning context as well. But to leverage the benefits that you can get from social learning, it's good to try and think about the mix and balance that you have in that group. So try and get complementing skill sets in there, different levels of experiences, and also think about, you know, if you really know your audience, who's an extrovert, who's an introvert, and how can you team people up that way as well. A really good knowledge share going on. And lastly, test and iterate. So social interactions and games as well, they're impossible to just conceptualize. You're never going to know how they work, how they feel until you test them out. So just really advocate doing that as soon as possible. We often sort of paper prototype and do it in quite lo-fi ways, just to de-risk it as early as possible. And I think if you sort of sign up, post that to people, people are often quite generous with that. And if you sort of explain that you're doing this as a test and that you're guinea pig, then we found that people are quite sort of patient and generous with their feedback as well. So that can all sort of be blended in as part of the experience if positioned in the right way. So that was all I had to say today. We're both here for questions, if you have any questions. And I also have a question to throw open to everyone in the room as well, which is, I'm really interested to know how everyone else has been connecting with their learners digitally over the last couple of months, and what's changed, what's worked, what hasn't. But otherwise, just to say thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Sophie and Matt. Brendan made a point early on in terms of interactivity, putting off the casual browsers. So I guess that goes to your point, Sophie, early on about knowing your introverts and extroverts, and people who interact with content in different ways. I don't know if Brandon, if you want to elaborate more on what you wanted to specifically know more about, that would be great. I had one question while we wait for Brandon. There were some great examples of transferring explicit knowledge. I'm curious to know that if you have any examples of how these types of solutions can be applied to tacit knowledge areas. So any examples of creating games or AR, VR solutions for transferring tacit knowledge.
Oh, what do you mean by tacit knowledge? So that's silent knowledge, right?
Yeah, so it's more inherent. I mean, it's usually often, I guess, it's aligned with more coaching or leadership areas, because the examples given were quite, things that you can put into a process very easily.
Yeah, I see.
So I don't know if there are any examples that you want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there are. Sorry, I'm thinking now.
Briefly. Sorry, I know it's not, not expecting a full blown.
Yeah, so we've been doing loads of work recently with interpersonal skills, and the talk I was sort of planning to do in May was actually about some work that was also with Seven Trent actually, but on coaching, and the work we've done with that. And I mean, specifically with virtual reality, there's some really interesting things you can do because of the phenomena of embodiment. Where you can kind of trick your brain into taking on this kind of mantle of an avatar. And you can then get them to empathise with a position that they would otherwise maybe feel a bit dislocated from. In terms of gamifying though, I don't know if I would call it a serious game. It was definitely a learning experience. There were little tips and tricks. So when you're in the main coaching conversation, we use these kind of insight bubbles. So you'd be having a conversation with this avatar and trying to coach her back to a good place. And you had this kind of score meter on the table just to show you sort of how you were progressing. But also because when we talk to one another, we're not always really aware what the other person's thinking. So someone might say, oh yeah, that sounds great. You don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. So we had these little pop-ups that, the character was called Dahlia, and she might say, that sounds great. It would just pop up saying, Dahlia isn't sure about this. And we found it was a real sort of talking point. Like people always mention it as the one thing they always mention when they go into that, because it just fed that thirst for a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more insight into the impact they were having on another person. And yeah, it really made people want to sort of repeat play and that kind of thing. Is that the kind of thing that kind of example?
Yeah, and it's especially, I think it was in the learning technologies back in February, which feels like a long time ago. There
Yeah.
were examples of AI coaching coming through, and this is one of the things that I find quite fascinating, things that, because you often know more than you can articulate, therefore how can you create a solution, an engaging and valid enough solution to be able to mimic that knowledge, so then you know you can interact with it and it doesn't feel fake, but it feels good enough to be actually learning from it. So, but yeah, definitely, I think it's being able to read beyond what people are saying, beyond the words, and picking up on different clues beyond just what's being said. It's one of those abilities that we need to get better at, and it's just really, I find it really hard to picture how that can be
I think
gamified.
the one thing that VR can do very well that is quite good for, I guess, for certain areas of the kind of tacit knowledge sort of stuff is the kind of pure simulation aspect of sort of, you know, you can use VR to kind of create a situation and just put somebody in it, and then them just being embodied in the situation and having to respond to stuff that's going on. Or for example, if there's a degree of, so when I say simulation, if you can have a few elements that interact in some form of realistic way, then you can create something that's quite kind of dynamic and has various different outcomes, as opposed to something where you're looking for a specific outcome. And so that element can help with that kind of knowledge and training. Obviously, something like coaching is you know, that's quite nuanced and tricky because you're talking about coaching people, but something like a kind of situational awareness. So, for example, we've done some work with Ørsted for engineers who get onto wind turbines out at sea. So we have a training experience that's based around that. And some of the material that's in that is based around the protocol that they have to follow. But another part of it is kind of just exposure. So just getting people familiar to the scale of the situation and to what it might feel like standing on a boat that's on the sea in front of a huge turbine. And so that's, you know, it's obviously a different kind of knowledge, and that's maybe not like quite probably what you're alluding to with tacit knowledge with people who have these kind of hidden skill sets, but it is a kind of form of that, if you like, where it's a kind of experience that you can't really teach just through learning specific outcomes to things. It's just being able to get your bearings and be able to think clearly in a situation that might be quite overwhelming. So that's one example. And I think maybe another one that touches on that is some of the games that we've done that involve team mechanics. So Sophie's talked about a couple. I've also worked on one which is aimed at school kids, kind of getting them into engineering domain. And they have a game that's a little bit like a sort of Crystal Maze type activity where somebody's in the VR headset and they have these simple puzzles to solve. And then the people outside of the headset have clues that they can combine. But it's fairly open-ended, so they have to learn to kind of discuss things with one another, and it's not too prescriptive that what's sort of expected of you. And again, you know, there are specific things that you want them to solve, but that does allow this sort of creating an environment where they need to problem solve together and work on types of communication and that sort of thing, which aren't really things, again, that in a very explicit way you can teach. You kind of need people to practice that and sort of, so again, you can sort of put people into a headspace where they might be able to kind of work on some of those skills that you're not explicitly pushing them towards something that you can define very well. And that sort of thing is works well when you have a sort of somebody running that session who can oversee it. And if people are getting stuck, they can jump in, but they can allow them the space to kind of experiment and make mistakes. So yeah, I think those sorts of experiences would definitely be kind of relevant, and that kind of immersion and team building and experimentation is quite good for the tacit knowledge stuff.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, that was my only question. Thank you for sharing that. I cannot see any more questions coming through, so I guess that brings us to the end. Thank you very much, both of you, for sharing
Thank you for having
these
us.
2 great case studies, and thank you to everyone who dialed in to listen. And I wish you a lovely weekend, bank holiday weekend even. Enjoy the sunshine.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.